Okay, so with us we have Dr. Martina Pierdomenico, who is a marine scientist, researcher at CNR, the National Researcher Council, and we're going to talk about marine litter. So, Dr. Pierdomenico, can you tell us about your area of work?
Yes, I'm a marine scientist, so my field of work is the marine environment and especially the seafloor environment. In particular, I'm interested in understanding the interplay between the geological and oceanographic processes acting on the seafloor with the anthropogenic stressor and the effect on the biological community. Although lately my research has been mainly addressed in understanding the role of this geological process in transfer and deliver marine litter to the deep sea area. In fact, the same process that usually carry food and nutrient to deep sea ecosystem and which can support the biodiversity hotspot in the deep sea may also carry pollutant and in this case litter, which is coming from land in large quantities.
So nature is acting against us in this situation. It was the processes of nature.
Well, actually, nature has its own process. So it's not nature that is working against us. It's just that the process, the natural process, interact with the anthropic pressure. And this is, for example, the case of the Submarine Canyon, which is one of the main topic of my research. Submarine Canyon are a steep valley that carve all the margin of all oceans, and they function as a pathway connecting the coastal domain with the deep sea. And usually they can carry a large amount of sediment, nutrient, water masses to deep sea ecosystem to support rich and varied community. But instead of carry sediment, we are observing large amount of waste, mostly derived from land, which is transported throughout these sedimentary fluxes that occasionally flush this canyon. So, for instance, we went survey in the framework of a national project coordinated by the CNR. We went explore some canyon in the southern Italy, where we have a direct connection between the head of this canyon and some torrential river. And rivers are recognized globally as one of the main input of litter. We explore there with underwater robot equipped with the camera, and we discover very, very large amount of urban waste lying at hundreds of meters depth.
Before we talk about that, can we talk about the process that brings the litter in first? I saw a documentary actually, that the process, the geological process that brings in the litter are gyres because they are due to the rotation of the earth.
Yes,
it makes the ocean currents and the winds above create this circulation that brings the waste into the center of these ocean currents. Is that how the waste is transported?
Well, actually, these are kind of different processes. I mean, we can model pretty well the behavior of the floating litter, and actually all the surface current may concentrate the floating litter that enters the sea into the so-called garbage patch, which are this accumulation of, these are areas with very high density of floating litter that usually occur at the center of the subtropical gyre in ocean. One of the problems is that the estimate of this floating litter is less than 1% of the expected stock. We know that about 10 million tons per year of plastic enter the sea each
10
year.
million tons per year.
Yes,
Wow.
10 million tons per year.
And-
And these estimates are predicted to rise under a business as usual scenario. So we have this pressing problem of plastic entering the sea, but we don't know where most of the plastic ends up.
If we know the center of the gyres won't.
So the center of the gyre is one of the accumulation zone, but most of litter and also plastic, its fate is to sink on the seafloor, because they will tend to sink either because they are more dense than seawater, or also because some processes like biofouling or the leaching of additive may determine the sink of the bulk of litter that entered the sea on the seafloor. And one of the
chemicals, it will become more dense and sink.
Yes,
and
we still just to say that this is probably one of the major scientific challenge for the scientific community working on litter, is to understand the pathway of transport, distribution, and ultimately the final destiny of the litter. And we think that, well, all the recent observation points out to the seafloor as a measured sink for the marine litter. But still, our knowledge on the occurrence of litter on the seafloor is really poorly constrained, because we still have to pinpoint. Huh?
It's a new area of research.
Yes, it's a new area of research. We have to take into account that deep sea exploration are quite expensive and involve technological capability which are not
high pressure.
Yeah, there is a high pressure, and you have to use very sophisticated technology, such as this remote operated vehicle, to observe the seafloor at hundreds or thousands meter depth. But the recent research are showing that submarine canyon are one of the setting that can accumulate a very large amount of litter. The Messina Strait, where we found among the highest density of deep sea litter ever reported, is not a unique case, since recent work are showing even larger accumulation of litter in other submarine canyon of the Mediterranean and other oceans like the China Sea. So this feature function as a pathway for the transport of material from land to the deep sea.
Okay, and another question before we get to Kenai, it was a question I was wondering about. How does, so rivers bring in the litter, major part of the waste comes from litter. How does litter go from landfills into rivers?
Well, litter can be transported, especially the light one, by winds, or also the the drainage network with the rain usually can funnel all the litter in rivers.
The drainage network, you mean?
I mean all the land that with the rain, with the wind, much of material will be transported into river. And then there is another problem, which is the mismanaged waste. For example, the situation of Messina is peculiar because we have this river which are dry most time of year, and sometimes they are used as disposal area or not the disposal area.
The river is used as
sometimes
a disposal area.
Yes, because there is well, the waste management cannot be properly assessed. So when there is a flood on this river, the flood will carry all natural, such as vegetal debris, but also litter, and discharge directly into the sea. And since during flood, the density of the fresh water is higher, it becomes higher because it's enriched in mud and all the other material, the boulders, but also the litter in this case. It will not flow, it will not float as normally the fresh water does, but it will sink and generate the so-called hyperpigmental flow. So this is one of the process which may funnel directly into the canyon head large amount of litter. And this is usually occur when you have coastal mountain range and very steep sea floor. So there is a direct link and a very high gradient, which may favor the transport at higher depth.
The river comes from a mountain.
We are observing,
comes with a bigger momentum.
Yes, that's why they are able to generate this very powerful flood, and also to to discharge directly into the head of canyon. But still, what we are observing is that even the canyon that has their heads very far from the coast or not connected with the river can funnel large amount of plastic, because plastic is easily transported by current, and once it sinks, the current acting on the continental shelf, which is the plain area close to the coast, can funnel directly into the canyon. And this is one of the natural processes that usually occur. Canyon have these kind of currents, which are called downwelling currents, or in specific location, there can be some events which are called cascading. But in any case, canyon function as a funnel. They funnel the current which enter and accelerate inside the canyon. And this kind of process may drive the transport of all the plastic which is traveling on the continental shelf. And another problem with this feature is that they, for their natural characteristic, they usually host very valuable ecosystem and host higher biomass. So they are also target for fishing activity. And so they do not only host a lot of land-based litter, but they also accumulate a lot of fishing related debris, which is entangled on the wall of this valley. So
why do they attract the fish?
Because all the currents that provide food can support rich ecosystem and also very high biomass of both the organisms that live on the seafloor, but also the pelagic one, the fishes. So usually fishing vessels tend to go fishing close to Submarine Canyon because these are very productive areas. And so in addition to land-based litter, Submarine Canyon can also host very high density of abandoned fishing net or lines. So these are vulnerable ecosystem they host. Sorry?
It attracts, internet got a little bit cut. It attracts not only litter, but also, can you say that again?
Not only litter from land, but also it can accumulate a lot of abandoned fishing net and line, which get entangled into the rocky wall of this canyon. So these are very specific features, which are very important because they are biodiversity hotspot, but are also very vulnerable to this kind of pressure, especially the marine litter.
Yes, it sounds tragic. It brings in all the marine life to the center of to a canyon, to a part, and then it also brings in the litter for the marine life to live off, and it ultimately kills it. It's
yes, we have. I mean, I think that to solve any problem, we need to know it before. So I think exploration, it's essential to understand the extent and magnitude of this kind of pollution. And then we can support any kind of reduction of strategy to face with this problem.
Yes,
and also we should be aware that we are impacting ecosystem that we still don't know very well, because the deep sea and the deep sea ecosystem is one of the most vulnerable but also less known environment on Earth. And it's also the largest biome on Earth because it's very wide. Still, even if we don't know exactly the functioning of this very fragile ecosystem, we are impacting them. So the consequence of our activity extend well much farther than we can imagine. Yes, basically my interest in is understanding how the natural process can contribute in driving the distribution of plastic, and also which kind of impact this litter may have on the benthic ecosystem. And this is something we are still working on, but the interaction between litter and fauna can be several, and sometimes these are harmful interaction, because litter can entangle organism, or it can be ingested by a wide variety of organisms with ecotoxicological consequences that we are still trying to assess. The single-use plastic is one of the most common items we found in the marine environment. And it's obviously related to the increase in production and consumption of this kind of item, which have a very short lifespan. So this is because the largest proportion is composed by this kind of plastic.